Hi, everyone. It's Stephanie with the Patient Story, and really thrilled to introduce our guest today, whom I was so lucky to meet on social media. And we'll make sure to plug Stephen, your account leader, for anyone who wants to take a look. But Stephen Huff, thank you for joining us today to share your story about getting diagnosed with lung cancer.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. It's an honor to be here in more ways than one, as you know, as a fellow survivor. I'm very excited to be joining the Patient Story.
Awesome. And, we like to start by, of course, everyone we talk to, it's focused on the cancer story and the journey and everything, but you're way more than that. And I wanted to lead in with that. And you actually have really a cool background in sports. So I'd love for you to talk about that while I share some photos.
Absolutely. So I grew up in Middle Tennessee area, and in the Southeast, as I'm sure most of your viewers are aware, sports is more than just sports. It's a way of life. And so I grew up playing sports my entire life, specifically baseball. I was fortunate enough to play at the college level, and even more fortunate to get drafted by the Chicago White Sox. And so, sports was a big part of my life. There's so many life lessons that you learn. You learn about things like, work ethic, persistence, all these various things that are tools that you put in your tool belt moving forward as an adult. So, I love talking about my journey, specifically as it relates to my athletics background.
Yeah, and I know you were talking about the message of, whom can get diagnosed. It's, there's a stigma, there's misconceptions, there's a lot that we're going to cover there. A little bit before we move on to your story, tell us where you're joining us from, and did you grow up there? And is there any last thing you want to say about who Stephen is?
Absolutely. So I grew up in the Middle Tennessee area. I live in Franklin, Tennessee now. And I would say in my college and professional years, I lived a little bit of everywhere. I think I lived in a total of about 15 different states at one point or another. And that's just through sports and traveling and whatnot. But I am here now. My roots are here. My wife and I have started our family in Franklin, and this is home for us. And everyone always asks, do you wear cowboy hats and cowboy boots to work? And we don't ride horses. We are the music city. I wouldn't say we're the country music city, but we are the music city. We're known for country music. That's for sure. But it's a great place to live. And I look forward to spending the rest of my life with my family. Locally here in Nashville area.
Nashville area. Wonderful. And we will bring up some photos of you and your family. Congratulations on starting your family there. That's awesome. Okay, well, thank you for introducing yourself to us, Stephen. I'd like to sort of get underway now and let people know, how did you know that something was wrong? What were those first symptoms for you?
So for me, I was in a transitional state of my life. And what I mean by that is after my college baseball playing career was over and I got drafted, I really transitioned it myself into kind of a different level of sports, working out, fitness, whatever you want to call it. And so when my playing career ended, which was in around 2013-14, and I joined the rest of the real world in a normal job, I just assumed it was normal to gain weight, to get out of breath, and just not be able to do some of the things that you maybe were used to being able to do. And so I started to notice my very first symptoms in 2015. And the reason that I can remember is because I was in graduate school. I was student teaching in Carrollton, Georgia, where I was also coaching baseball. And I began to have shortness of breath. And I think because of the timing of the year and all of the things that I mentioned before, I just assumed it was allergies or it was, something normal. This is what happens to normal people. And so when I think about it in hindsight, I obviously can self-reflect and say, that was the sign of the very first symptom that something was off in my body.
Yeah, it's fascinating how in the moment we just attribute it to our lives. I remember when I was going through my symptoms and I just thought, well, I'm so tired, but yeah, my job, or whatever, but what was the point for you, Stephen, where it was, okay, this is not normal. I need to go see somebody.
Well, believe it or not, I actually lived with this shortness of breath for some time. And I would even get to the point where I could code it. I could keep it discreet. I learned to talk around it. And the best way to describe it was, for me, I would be talking and it would feel like someone would jab me in the stomach. And so it would cause me to just kind of, cringe my stomach up. And I learned to deal with the symptoms. And our bodies are so fascinating and unique in that way that our brains, once we acknowledge something, we just kind of like forget about it and we continue on. And we do this with more than one just thing, shortness of breath. We do this with other ailments. And so I carried this on for at least a year, possibly two, until I started to get really, really wheezy. And that's the best way that I can describe it. When I would lie down at night to go to bed, it sounded like there was like fluid in my chest. And I remember lying in bed, looking at the ceiling, not able to sleep. And my wife says, "Stephen, I really think you should go to the doctor. Like, this is not normal. It's beyond keeping you awake at night. Now it's keeping me awake at night. So I think you should go see a physician." And so I would say that time frame was about a year to a year and a half.
Wow, you lived with it for a while. You just worked your way around it. That's so interesting. And
Mhm.
so your wife Emily says, "Look, let's get this checked out." So at that point, is it you just make an appointment with your primary care, and what happened?
Well, thinking nothing of it, I didn't even think to make an appointment with my primary care. At the time, I had a scheduled appointment, but it was at least probably 10 or 11 months away. And so I didn't even think to call and to try to push it forwards. What I did was I went to a walk-in clinic. I complained about breathing and I complained about the wheezing at night. So they prompted an X-ray. They did a chest X-ray, which yielded a diagnosis of bronchitis. So the nurse practitioner says, "I have bronchitis. Here are some antibiotics, and you should be fine." And I distinctly remember walking out of the parking lot, thinking in my head, "I've never had bronchitis, but I don't think this is bronchitis." I mean, it might be, but I'm just, like something inside of me is telling me that it's more than that. And so about 2, maybe 3 weeks later, I scheduled an appointment with a specialist. I wanted to go see an ENT, or an ear, nose, and throat physician, because for some reason I had always thought this was allergy related. And I thought that would be the physician to see. So when I walked in to see the physician, he gave me a full examination. He also, along with the fluid in the lungs, he could feel a hard nodule above my right collarbone. You know how they do the inspection, they check your neck. And so that was an alarm. That was probably the second alarm bell. and and as you know, with insurance, nothing is easy and nothing is straightforward. So I had to do a second X-ray before I could do any further testing. I had to do a separate X-ray, and that's when the ear, nose, and throat physician sent me to do an X-ray, which again yielded nothing except possible pneumonia. And so I'm sitting here with a bronchitis, pneumonia, and diagnosis, and I still have no answers, and I'm not getting better.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I mean, even after this ENT felt the nodule and everything, he or she basically just said, "Oh, well, the X-ray just proves it's probably pneumonia."
That's exactly right. I called the physician to ask if there was further testing that could be done, specifically with the nodule in my neck, because as you know, when we have these nodules and bumps and what have you, we check the internet, we scour, we try to find as much information as possible, which leads to all of this fear and anxiety. And so after reading the internet for several hours on end, I said I needed to get this thing checked. So we had an ultrasound, was the third diagnostic test done. The ultrasound resulted was inconclusive. I don't remember specifically getting any kind of negative feedback, but I do remember getting an inconclusive, like, follow up with an additional test. And it was at that point that we had checked all of the boxes to finally get the chest CT scan approved. The chest CT scan was obviously what ultimately threw up the alarm bells, the whistles, the lights, was the imaging that actually set off the fire alarm for the lung cancer.
And so, Steve, if I'm looking at your timeline that you sent me, and thanks for that, by the way. So, I mean, it's the first symptoms, and then it's the walk-in clinic and x-ray, then it's the ENT x-ray, and then it's an ultrasound that, by the way, you had to push for, which is part of this whole self-advocacy message that we'll definitely be diving into. It says that also in May of 2017, you had gone to see a community hospital oncologist. That's the person who then ordered the CT scan. Is that right?
Yes. So the CT got ordered, and the results yielded a lot of things. Basically, there were several suspicious areas in not only my chest, but also in my abdomen, my neck, my pelvis area as well. So that was probably the realest, scariest moment of the entire journey, because up to this point, I was in my own brain. This was all arbitrary. This was minuscule. I was very healthy, young, fit, and this was not something that I had taken serious up to that point. But I'll never forget, as a new teacher, I had just finished my first year as a teacher. So I am on cloud nine. I am starting my first summer as an educator, which is the best part of teaching. And I had all of this happen the day after the last day of school. And so for me, this was a black cloud, I guess is the best way to put it. And it was very traumatic.
Whew. Yeah, I mean, you're like getting ready to, have the time of your life. Like you said, summertime, best time as an educator.
Yep.
And then you get hit with this. I can't imagine, just that moment for you. To be clear, had you gotten that CT scan ordered and then you met the oncologist after, or did you meet with the oncologist first who then ordered the scan?
I met with the oncologist first. And so I was passed off to the oncologist based on something in the ultrasound result. And it was still speculation at that point. I didn't even really know what an oncologist was. I was like, what is are they a specialist?
Right.
And, whatever. And I think I was just, that was the safe move at the time. And so when I got the results from the CT scan, it just even further validated, that I had a lot going on in my body. And so after we got the results from that CT scan, the oncologist then ordered a core needle biopsy to confirm what that what that node in my neck was. And we did that at the end of May. And I found out on June 1st, 2017, that I had adenocarcinoma of the lung, stage 4 lung cancer.
Oh my gosh. Oof. That's a lot that you had to go through. Can you recount? Well, first, how did you find out the CT scan results? Was it like an email? Did they give you a call? And then if you could recount that moment, June 1st, when you actually, was that the first time you heard the word cancer? I mean.
So I remember that I had gone to Cracker Barrel, which in the South is a very popular restaurant.
I love Cracker Barrel.
I went to Cracker Barrel. I was celebrating my first summer as an educator and just soaking it in. And on my way home from Cracker Barrel, that's when my phone rang, and it was the doctor saying, "Hey, Stephen, I just want to let you know your CT scan is not good." And what I mean by that is we don't we don't know what's going on in your chest and your body, but we know that it appears to look like cancer. And so I'm going to need you to come in as soon as possible, like drop everything you're doing, come in. And I remember distinctly, filling out the paperwork. And I remember the last question on there was, "Do you have a living will?" And that for me was the defining moment. That is when it all sank in, that this was real. And this was not only real, this was something that is life threatening. And so if I can take you back, as a cancer patient and survivor, I think the worst part is the waiting, because it's the unknown. That's when your mind starts to race and you just start imagining, and you have all of these, ideations of things. So with lung cancer, we ordered this, they call it a foundation test, and it's called biomarker genomic sequencing, some of the technical terms, but it takes, between 7 and 10 days. And so those 7 to 10 days were nightmarish. I mean, I was not sleeping. And then, have you ever had when someone maybe tells you that you're sick, you start to like feel more sick?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so for me, it was so mental in that regard, because up to that point I was so healthy. I was going to the gym. I was, exercising, maybe not as rigorously as I used to, but then I couldn't. I started to feel sick. I started to feel, worse. And so the combination of those two things was really, really hard for me to deal with. And when I went in on June the 1st, it was pretty much all set in stone. I had made up in my mind that it was cancer. It was worst case scenario. And so, the physician said, these are the options. And we talked about treatment, but I don't remember a whole lot after I heard, unfortunately it is cancer, because, as you know, it's such a surreal thing. It's so hard to remember everything, because it's just, I don't know. It's something that you're just not equipped to deal with.
Not at all. I mean, we are definitely not taught how to handle that. And you brought up so many points that, I mean, as you were talking, I'm like, oh yes, I'm like nodding my head vigorously. I mean, the waiting part, when the
Mm-hmm.
tests are underway and you're like, I just want to know, what am I dealing with? It's excruciating. Do you remember how you were able to get through it? Did you just try to keep yourself preoccupied, watch TV?
I think for me, with it's gonna sound weird, but I think for me, I didn't want to show weakness. I didn't want anyone around me to see, that how much of an impact that it had on me. And so, like your friends and family and loved ones do, everyone, kind of halos around you, tells you you're going to be okay. We've got this, strength in numbers. And you're just kind of like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And so for me, I put up this, I wouldn't call it, yeah, I would call it fate. I put up this like, yeah, sure, we got this. But then on the inside, I was like, I'm going to die tomorrow. I mean, that's just how I dealt with it. And so it was really hard for me because, growing up in sports,
Right.
or in anything in life, you're always told the harder you work, the better the results. If you push yourself, whether that's in the gymnasium, in the weight room, the more extra repetitions, the more time you spend, you're going to be successful. And so for me, this was the first obstacle in my life that I did not have something tangible that I could push myself through. And that was extremely difficult. I love to be the driver of my own car.
Right.
I love to be the person in control of my life.
Yep.
And so that was such a hard reality for me to face, because as you know, cancer, one of the things it does more than anything is it takes away that feeling of control in life.
Yeah.
And so Slowly but surely, it was a day by day process for me. Once I got my diagnosis, I immediately hit denial. You know, this is not me, or a shock first, but immediately into denial. This is not me. This is not going to happen to me. And then I started to feel bad for myself. And I think that was probably the darkest time. So I had a gap of about 3 weeks from the time I was diagnosed to the time I actually started treatment. And those 21 days were extremely hard. I mean, the hardest probably 21 days of my life, because, you know, my life had literally been turned upside down in the blink of an eye. And so I would say I didn't actually start to transition out of that until I started my treatment on the June 22nd.
Yeah. No, that's, again, you brought up another, it's control, the lack of it, the loss of it. It's funny, one of the taglines I'd come up with the patient story in the beginning was, you know, get a sense of calm and control from other people. It calls into question how much control we really have, but the point is to try to give a sense of it, right? Because it's like, wait. Like you said, you were taught your whole life, you just work hard and then you'll get the thing at the end, you know? It's but
Yeah,
here
exactly.
it's like, sorry, it's not going to work that way right now.
Yeah.
Did you also brought up, you know, the people around you and the, no, we're going to get through this together. At what point in this process did you decide to start telling people? And, you know, how did you make the decision of whom you wanted to share the news with?
I think that pretty early, we decided to share with our family and friends. Specifically, our immediate family had been pretty involved. My mom, my dad, and my wife's parents, my in-laws, that all of us knew of the situation. And so my wife and I waited about a week until we started to tell the rest of our family and friends, because you know, when you're processing something like that, it's you can never think of the best way to word it, to phrase it. And so I think sometimes you try to just give yourself a little bit of time to digest, and before you start to you know, tell everyone, because I think if you do it immediately, you know, you can open yourself up to not being able to fully digest it, because that is an important step. I mean, you do need to, you know, understand your diagnosis. You need to understand, you know, treatment options and all these things. And if you just skip that and go into, you know, the next step, sometimes you can have like a fallback. So anyways, long story short, I think that we were pretty quick to tell our family and friends.
Do you have any advice for people on how to, you know, break the news, or how to do it in a way where you put yourself first, you know, still maybe?
Yeah, I think do it on your own terms. You know, for me, it was I liked the idea of calling my friends and telling them. I felt a little uncomfortable when people would call me or text me or send me messages. And I know that you cannot control that, and people just want to help, you know, innately. So my best advice would be find a place where you can gather your thoughts and get away from, even if it's your spouse or your parents or your best friend in the entire world. Go for a walk, go for a couple walks, you know, go to somewhere that you can gather your thoughts, think a little bit, think about what you want to say and how you want to say it, because it is important for you mentally to have an approach. And I think that for me was my approach, and that was, you know, how we decided that we were going to step forward with this.
Right. No, that's beautifully said. I can appreciate all that you said, actually. Stephen, back to the actual testing part too. You had mentioned that the diagnosis, I know, is June 1st. You mentioned there was, for the diagnosis, there was a CT scan and a core needle biopsy done. Was that for both the actual diagnosis and for staging? And if you could actually walk through some of those procedures for people who have never undergone one, that would be great.
Definitely. It's a combination of both. The results for the cancer come back earlier. So when I found this nodule in my neck, they sent me to a radiologist, and I forget, it's a specific type of radiologist, an internist, I think, something like that. And they took an ultrasound remote, and they did what's called an ultrasound guided core needle biopsy. And so if you're afraid of needles, then, close your ears for a minute. But essentially they find the nodule, and they try to get as much tissue sample as possible. And when they send that off, the first result that comes back is whether or not it's cancer, and if so, what kind of cancer. If it is cancer, then they take the remaining core tissues, and then they start the gene sequencing, the mutation arrangements, the biomarker testing, all of those things that can dictate your treatment options. And so when I found out on June 1st that I had stage 4 lung cancer, I had adenocarcinoma of the lung. It was non-small cell, which is the most common type of lung cancer, but we had to still wait for the remaining results of the core needle biopsy to come back to see if I had a targetable mutation driver of my tumors before I can just jump straight into a treatment.
Right, and it turned out that you had the ALK positive mutation, is that right?
That is correct. In lung cancer, there is a pretty short and long list, depending on who you ask, of how many mutations you can have. The most common are EGFR, KRAS. I know I'm missing a couple here, but anyways, ROS1, yes, that's one as well. ALK positive is actually only in about 5% of non-small cell lung cancer cases. So it's definitely the minority. And when I heard that, I was not happy, because I said, well, this is great. There's not going to be any drugs available. They're going to kick me to the curb. But I was shocked to find out to the contrary. When I found out I had this ALK mutation, and it stands for anaplastic lymphoma kinase mutation. And I found out that there are actually a lot of drugs specifically for the ALK positive rearrangement. And so that was so encouraging to me. That was the first encouraging thing, the first encouraging bit of news through the diagnosis.
Which can be so rare in this journey.
Yeah.
It's like you take it what you can. And I want to dive into that in our next video for sure. But before we move on, I know for people who are scared of needles, not that anyone loves needles, but with that core needle biopsy, was it done by an interventional radiologist? Is that right?
That's exactly what it was. Interventional. I knew it started with an I.
With an I, I know.
Yeah.
There's so much terminology we don't even care to learn that we just look up. So anything else about that you, in terms of just sort of tips for people? It sounds scary. Any tips on how to get through it, or, even mentioning how long it takes? And
Sure. So for lung cancer patients specifically, I am a rare case in the sense that I had a lymph node sitting right there on the surface level of my skin. They could access with a needle. Most patients do not have that luxury. Most patients never have that. So the standard procedure is usually called a bronchoscopy, or what they may call a VAT. And so for those two procedures, they actually sedate you. It's an outpatient procedure, but they sedate you. They go into your lungs, and then they scrape from the inside of your lungs. So you're asleep the entire time. I've heard that procedure can be good, can be also have some side effects. But for me, I actually was in the rare case in that I had a nodule just sitting right next to my neck that they could, easily access.
Right. Lucky or unlucky, I guess that's.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm not sure.
Okay, great. And so, and then just to wrap up this too, I know in your notes you'd said there was an ensuing staging MRI and PET scan. Was that after your diagnosis and they just wanted to confirm, or yeah, what happened there?
Yes. So a lot happened on June 1st. I received my diagnosis, and I also, I had I had to be staged. And so to do this, they wanted to do not only a PET scan, but they wanted to do a full MRI. So head, neck, thoracic, lumbar, and sacrum. So if you've ever had an MRI, you know it is not the world's greatest experience. And I did with and without contrast. Each section was 15 minutes, and I did it twice. So I spent a good 2.5 hours in an MRI tube just to get staged, along with the PET scan, which, as you know, the PET scan is a little different. It's they basically they give you the glucose and the liquid version of the radiation, and they spot it that way. So that was a little less invasive than the MRI. But yeah, after that, I then had my port put in because it was assumed that I was going to start chemotherapy. And so while we waited for my results from the biomarker testing, I had a lot of additional tests.
It's a good heads up for people. It's not just like, oh, here's a few tests and then magically the answer appears. And of course it's case dependent, but like I think a lot of people go through a series. Do you have any last sort of guidance for people on how to get through not just the tests, but also I wanted to ask, do you remember how long it took to get the results? You'd mentioned before waiting for answers is really excruciating, and we have scanxiety.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So my advice would be to just find something to occupy your brain. And for me, idle hands are the worst. When I sit at home and I don't do anything, I go crazy. And so I have to find something to do, even if that means I really, don't want to do it and I'm in the worst possible mood. Just getting up, going for a walk, for me, going for a hike, walking with my wife, getting my mind off of what if, or if this happens, or playing all these scenarios out in my head, and just it helps for me, and it helps with scanxiety too.
Perfect. And we know that scanxiety lasts for a while, doesn't go away very quickly. So
Yep.
for some people, and so that's great advice. Thank you. So we're going to move on to the next section now, where we talk about treatment decisions and then actually your targeted therapy. So sit tight for a second with us.